So we're here to talk about period and frequency. So to start off, period is just the amount of time between two events. So if something is happening over and over again, the period of time between those. So an example is like a full moon. The period is every 28 days. Every 28 days, you see a new full moon. Days of the week, Sunday comes every 7 days. That would be the period. Let's say that I have something, a fan spinning and spinning, and I measure how much time it takes for it to make a complete loop. Maybe that is a tenth of a second, probably less than that. But the period measures the amount of time between events. So period is always going to be units of time. So that's one way of knowing that you're dealing with period and not frequency, is these will all be in days, seconds, minutes, hours, years, some unit of time in order for it to be period. This is different from frequency, which is how many times an event happens in a given time period. So if the period of something is 10 seconds, that means every 10 seconds it happens once. But you could also have, so period has the symbol capital T because it's a unit of time. It's a special unit of time. Frequency, we're going to frequently use lowercase f. So the frequency of something, let's say the frequency of something was 10 times per second. You'll write that as 10. Well, one way you can write it is 10 per second, kind of like $10 an hour, 10 per second. This is how this is written, divided by seconds, or you'd write 10 inverse seconds. That means the same thing as 10 divided by seconds. So 10 inverse seconds, this means 10 times per second it happens, whereas a period of 10 seconds means it happens one time every 10 seconds. There's a difference between those two. Inverse seconds is not a unit we often see, so instead you're going to see it written as 10 hertz. That means the same thing. So when you see 10 hertz, that means something happens 10 times per second. When you see a period of 10 seconds, that does not mean it happens 10 times per second. It means it happens once in 10 seconds. Now, period and frequency are inverses of each other, meaning that if you know one, you can find the other just by kind of flipping the fraction. So if the period of something is 10 seconds, the frequency is going to be one time out of 10 seconds, or 0.1. So the frequency would be 0.1 inverse seconds, or 0.1 hertz, meaning it happens a tenth of a time per second. Again, so it takes a little bit of practice to get used to this, but that's sort of the meaning behind them. So let me just do another one. Let's say that the period of something was 100 seconds. So that means every 100 seconds it happens once. So the frequency is just going to be the inverse of that. And then when you do that, you get 0.01. And since it's inverse seconds, it's also the same as saying 0.01 hertz. So this means it happens less than one time per second, which is what we know if it only happens once every 100 seconds. These are connected. On the other hand, let's say I had a frequency. Let's say something happened with a frequency of 4 hertz. That means it happens 4 times per second. So the question is, how much time does it take for it to happen once? So to do that, we take the inverse, 1 over frequency. So 1 divided by 4 hertz, 1 over 4 is 0.25. And if you have hertz in the denominator, you're going to end up with seconds, because again, hertz is inverse seconds, so that flips it back up. All right, so if I have a full second and I divide it into 4 times, if something happens 4 times in a second, how much time is between each one? We're going to get 0.25 seconds. So if you divide up a second into quarters, you'll get a quarter of a second. So that should make sense. Let's do some practice problems then. So again, anytime you're a given period or frequency, if you want to find the other, you just take the inverse. So again, if the frequency is, 30 hertz, I want the period is just going to be 1 over the frequency. So 1 over 30 hertz. So 1 divided by 30, it's going to be 0.033 seconds. I'm rounding a little bit. That's it. Let's try another one. Let's say that someone's on a swing and they do 10 swings and it takes them 30 seconds to do that. So let's say, what is their period? So how much time per swing? Well, they were on the swing for 30 seconds and they did it 10 times. So the period is simply 3 seconds. And we should check that out. If you do something 10 times, 3 seconds each time, it should take 30 seconds. That makes sense. If they do 10 swings in 30 seconds, what is their frequency? Well, we would say, okay, we know the period's 3 seconds, so 1 divided by 3 seconds, I get 0.333 inverse seconds, or 0.33 hertz. Most people have an easier time working with period than frequency. So if you want to ever calculate period first, if you're trying to find frequency, you might want to calculate period first. That might make a little more sense. So let's do one more of these. So let's say that an event happens. Let's say it happens 5 times in, let's say in this case, it happens in 2 seconds. So if something happens in 5 times in 2 seconds, what is its frequency? So some people want to find the period first. So think about it this way: is the period more or less than a second? Sometimes 5 times in 2 seconds, its period must be less than 1 second. So it's 2 seconds divided by 5. So its period is 0.4 seconds, which again, if something happens 5 times and this is the amount of time each, 5 times 0.4 is 2. It checks out. So that's your period. So then your frequency would just be the inverse of that. And that should be 2.5. And that's going to be inverse seconds, or hertz. So what that means is it happens 2.5 times per second, which it also makes sense because it happens 2.5 times in the first second and 2.5 times in the second for a total of 5. So the big takeaways from this are these equations: that period is the inverse of frequency, and frequency is the inverse of period, and that frequency has units of hertz, or it could also be inverse seconds or inverse minutes, whereas period is always have units of time: seconds, minutes, days, hours, just pure time, nothing else with it. So do these things help you with the practice problems in the quiz? And that's it.